As you can probably tell, these aren't my normal clothes. I'm dressed to go train Jiu Jitsu. I train Jiu Jitsu, but my background is in personal training, as you probably know if you've been following, and physiotherapy and medicine. So I'm a personal trainer, physiotherapist, and I'm also currently studying medicine. So one of my very strong interests is the interaction between the physiology of health and disease and the physiology of performance, particularly in the sports that I'm interested in, of course. The purpose of today, what I want to focus on is the role of energy systems. So the energy systems that are going to contribute to your performance in Jiu-Jitsu and other grappling sports as well, but primarily Jiu-Jitsu, and what that actually means for the way that you train and the way that you eat. When I say the phrase energy systems, what I mean is the underlying cellular machinery that allows you to produce enough energy to do the activities that you need to do, okay? Or the processes of that underlying cellular machinery. And you can break this down into two domains that are actually fairly intuitive. So one of those is aerobic energy production, or aerobic energy system or systems. And then the other is anaerobic energy production. The words aerobic and anaerobic basically refer to the presence or absence of oxygen. Okay, so in high oxygen conditions, when I'm sitting here at rest, my oxygen saturations are high. I've got plenty of oxygen available in my blood and available in my tissues as a result. I'm able to use that to slowly produce energy, okay? The terms aerobic and anaerobic are a little bit misleading because it's not solely down to the presence or absence of oxygen, like that's misleading, but rather the rate at which we require energy production is probably a better way of looking at it. So typically, if we're performing very light activity, for example, we're walking, even jogging, or even jiu-jitsu drilling, if you're doing very light drilling, what you're using is primarily aerobic systems. And this means that you're able to produce energy in a fairly sustainable manner. So for every unit of energy substrate that's used, whether that be carbohydrate or fat, you're actually getting a greater return on investment there, i.e. more ATP, which is the currency of energy in the body. You're getting more ATP per unit of substrate that you're using. So it's very efficient, okay? And you're able to run oxidative processes, meaning involving oxygen, to supply that energy. And provided you're keeping your exercise intensity below a certain level, you'll be able to sustain that for a long time. This is why you're able to, walk basically forever until your skin or joints break down. You're able to walk basically forever, whereas you obviously can't sprint forever. Everyone knows that. That's quite intuitive. And that relates very much to these energy systems. So firstly, when you think of aerobic energy systems, you're thinking of slow, consistent, efficient energy production, okay? And that can come from either carbohydrates or fats, okay? So it's a slightly slower way of breaking down carbohydrates for energy. There are faster ways, which we'll be discussing, but you can also be breaking down fat for those types of exercise intensities. And I'll come back to discuss what that means for your nutrition in a little while. So when we start to talk about anaerobic or fast energy production, then this is very inefficient. So because we demand such a high rate of energy production, for example, during sprinting or with relevance to jiu-jitsu, if you're trying to, do takedowns, you're wrestling, you're trying to scramble up, super fast energy production is required there. We require high forces and we require high rates of force production. And this is a very inefficient process. So what our body will do here is, rather than using oxidative processes, it'll basically speed it up by running through glycolysis. And glycolysis is the process by which we break down carbohydrates for energy in the absence of oxygen. One of the byproducts there is lactate. And you've probably heard of lactate, you've probably heard of lactic acid. It's a little bit of a false way of thinking about it, because effectively what lactate does is lactate actually provides a buffer for the increase in pH or acidosis that occurs within the muscle when we're exercising. So effectively what happens is, when we're exercising at a very high rate, a very high intensity, we're running glucose through this glycolytic process, which can be thought of as a fast energy production system. And as a result of that, what happens is we get the accumulation of hydrogen ions. And these hydrogen ions are basically what lead to acidosis or the decrease in pH within the cell. I might have said increase in pH earlier. I meant increase in hydrogen ions and a decrease in pH. So those two things are inversely related. The more hydrogen ions you've got accumulating, which again occurs through that process of glycolytic energy production or fast energy production, what happens then is we get the accumulation of those hydrogen ions. The more hydrogen ions we have, the lower your pH gets and the more acidotic the cell is. So the more of an acidic state you have. And as you move into this acidotic state, effectively what happens is your muscles are less efficient at working. So they're not going to be able to produce the same force. They're not going to be able to produce energy at the same rate. And you're also going to get sensation related to acidosis and other related processes, which manifest then as your muscles burning. So it's not the lactate that causes your muscles to burn. It's the general decrease in pH, increase in the acidic environment, and some other related changes as well. So the thing that you need to know there is that we can produce energy at a fast rate. It's primarily a glycolytic process, meaning that it's involving the breakdown of glucose through the glycolytic pathway, glycolysis, but it's very inefficient and it comes with a much higher rate of fatigue, okay? So with that said, what we've just broken down there, right? Let's just do a quick review. Aerobic or slow energy production is efficient. It involves carbohydrates or fats, and it involves oxygen to go through its oxidative energy metabolism processes, okay? So that's one side of things. That's what we want to be using most of the time, ideally. So the fitter you are, the higher exercise intensity you'll be able to achieve while still using that energy system. And that is why when we talk about jiu-jitsu and other related sports, if you're aerobically fit, so you're, doing your moderate intensity exercise for, let's say, 30 to 90 minutes, you're doing these real boring sessions, improving your aerobic fitness. If you're building that aerobic base, that's going to allow you to do more work while still using those more efficient, slow energy processes, okay? Now, as you move towards the higher intensities, regardless of how fit you are, if you're scrambling, you're wrestling, etc., you're going to be using anaerobic or fast energy systems, okay? And that's primarily glycolytic. It's primarily involving the breakdown of glucose. It is a little bit more complicated because we've also got the phosphor creatine or creatine phosphate system, which effectively involves local creatine stores being used to replenish ATP, and that's one of the reasons that we supplement with creatine, and I would recommend that for someone that is doing jiu-jitsu or other grappling sports, because it gives you that explosiveness. It's part of that fast energy production system. And we've also got some very minor stores of ATP locally within the muscle that can be used, but that's used up very, very quickly. So when we're trying to maximize the fast energy production side of things, we need to have carbohydrates available, okay? That's really important, and that has implications for nutrition. We need to have creatine available, so we want to have creatine in our diet, for example, through red meat, or we want to be supplementing, or I should say, we want to be supplementing with a creatine supplement like creatine monohydrate, 3 to 5 grams per day, every day, forever, unless you have kidney or renal impairment, okay? So that's the fast energy production side of things. And then the slow energy production side of things, from a nutrition perspective, you can use carbohydrates or fats. So this is why when people are doing, longer activities, they can sustain, fat burning to provide them with the energy that they require. But fat will not suffice if you're grappling. If you want to be able to produce high forces, you want to wrestle, you want to scramble, you want to be explosive, a low carb, high fat diet is not going to cut it. We know from, countless studies that when it comes to high exercise intensities, being on a low carb, high fat diet just isn't going to cut it. Of course, it doesn't mean your performance is going to go to zero, but you're not going to be reaching your full potential. So you need to have carbohydrates in the diet. We've summarized that now. You understand slow energy production, carbohydrates, fats, efficient, okay? Can happen for a long time, but it's a slower rate. It's not going to carry us through the explosive tasks. Fast energy production, anaerobic, generally involving the absence of oxygen. It's glycolytic, primarily carbohydrate based, but we do have that top up of phosphor creatine and local ATP that we can use as well. This is a very inefficient way of producing energy. It's very effective at allowing us to produce high amounts of energy very quickly, but the problem is that fatigues very quickly as well. So if you're relying heavily on this, which you will be if you have a poor aerobic base, then that's going to be inefficient. You're going to fatigue sooner and your performance is going to tank. So with all of that said, this is why if you start jiu-jitsu, right, and you've got a poor level of fitness, or maybe you've constantly been using your strength or maybe just skill to get you by in jiu-jitsu, but as soon as your heart rate starts to elevate and you're challenged, your performance tanks, very often it's because you have a poor aerobic base. So if you're able to improve your aerobic fitness, then it means you're going to be using this slow, efficient energy production for a greater proportion of your jiu-jitsu training and your jiu-jitsu competition than digging into that faster energy production. You want that to be there, but you don't want to be using it all the time. This is also one of the reasons that it can sometimes be difficult for people who are very unfit to be able to exercise the same amount of time as someone who's already very fit. Same with people with obesity. If they're walking around the place and their heart rate is already heavily elevated and they don't have a good aerobic base, they're constantly digging into those anaerobic energy systems and becoming fatigued from even just walking around each day. And this is also one of the reasons why if you have a better level of aerobic fitness, day-to-day life is actually a bit easier, because I'm not going to be dipping into my fatiguing anaerobic energy systems as much because I've got that aerobic base. So I'm not accumulating the same amount of fatigue from walking around, walking upstairs, carrying the shopping, picking up the kids if you have kids, etc. So fitness is really important. Now, some of the summary applications of this information that I'd like you to take away from this video, because I will follow up, this is just an introduction, is that one, a low fat or a low carb, high fat diet is not going to cut it if you want to be explosive, you want to be powerful, and you want to be as strong as you can. It won't cut it. It might improve your health. It might allow you to perform well, but you won't be at your best, okay? Number two, if you have a good level of aerobic fitness, that's going to carry you through, even if you don't have that same level of explosiveness. What it does mean is that if you've got that aerobic fitness, you'll at least have more left in the tank when you do need to explode. You still need to work on the explosiveness, the power, the fast energy production, but if you have a good aerobic base, it's really going to help you, particularly when it comes to things like drilling, tolerating those, kind of long, boring drilling sessions, not getting as fatigued from them, and you'll probably recover better between sessions then, okay? So that's an important application there. Additionally, one thing on nutrition is that although I said a low carb, high fat diet won't cut it if you want to be at your best, it's actually perfectly fine to have a low carb meal or a low carb day on days that you're just drilling. So if you're just going into the gym to do an hour of drilling, maybe you're practicing your guard, I don't know, you're doing De La Riva drills or something like that, then you'll probably be fine on a low carb, high fat diet in that case, because you don't need those carbohydrates available for you when you're going to be, or because you're not being explosive on that day. But if you're going into competition and you're going into hard competition training, you want to have those carbohydrates available, or your performance is going to tank compared to what it would otherwise, all right? This high energy production side of things as well, an important application there that's important is that you can train that, okay? So if you're doing hard intervals on an assault bike, ski erg, bike erg, hill sprints, etc., that's going to help build up that side of things as well. It's not just about building the aerobic base, that is your foundation, but you can also improve your ability to increase energy at a faster rate, or to produce energy at a faster rate, and also to buffer that acidosis that we were talking about. So when we train, we can actually increase our ability to get rid of that acidosis and resist fatigue, which is obviously a fantastic benefit from the training process. Additionally, if you're stronger, so you're doing your strength training, your resistance training, that's also going to allow you to be more efficient there, because if you've got a higher level of muscle strength, then you're not going to be generating that same amount of fatigue, because the relative intensity of a given activity is going to be lower as you get stronger. So if you can lift, let's say 200 kilos in the gym and your opponent is 100 kilos and you have to lift them up, that's 50% of your 1 rep max, so to speak. If you can only lift 100 kilos, that's 100% of your 1 rep max. So you're actually going to require a much deeper dive into those anaerobic resources, those fatiguing energy resources, than the person who's much stronger. So you want to get stronger, you want to improve your anaerobic fitness, and you want to improve your aerobic fitness. Who would have thought it? Being fitter and stronger makes the sport easier, okay? And then finally, from a nutrition perspective, as I said, just to kind of summarize the recommendations there, even though these are just like summary application points, having a mixed diet is advisable, okay? I would bias the carbohydrates ideally if you're trying to perform at your best, particularly if you're doing hard sessions. But if you're just drilling, a low carb, high fat diet will probably be fine. and could also be used during a period where you're trying to maybe improve your body composition. Maybe you're trying to get a little bit leaner, but you're not doing hard competition training at that point in time. So you can periodize your nutrition over time in that way. But if you can come to the end of this video and understand those basics, I think that'll give you a good foundation to understand some of the things I'm going to discuss after in future videos. So in summary, guys, look, I'm not here to advise people on how they should train jiu-jitsu itself. Okay, I'm a blue belt. You know, I've only been training for a few years. I'm not an expert by any means, and I absolutely hand off to my coaches for any advice that I require there. But from a strength and conditioning and a nutrition perspective, like they're my areas of speciality. So I like to think I have a thing or two to offer for anyone who's doing jiu-jitsu. So I coach people like this. I coach people in many other sports to help them improve their performance, improve their body composition, and improve their health. So if you are interested, there's information about my coaching services in the description box below. But if you have any questions, I would love to hear them, because it's always really interesting to hear what people take away from these videos. You know, sometimes I can get a bit carried away. I might be saying glycolytic, acidotic, and, you know, all these sort of words that aren't necessarily familiar to the everyday person. And if you need me to explain, to elaborate further, absolutely no problem. Just drop it in the comments below. So thanks very much for watching, guys. Keep training hard. We'll see you on the mats.